Hopefully you guys enjoyed Worldwide Blue Screen Day yesterday. Hopefully you aren't the IT guy at your company who's in charge of now going around to manually solve this on every single affected PC. But enough about that. I'm sure you guys heard all about the CrowdStrike issues. Let's hop into something else you've been hearing a lot about, but with some new wrinkles. The Intel 13th and 14th gen CPU stability issues. In addition to Gamers Nexus having a lot to say about this, there's been some claims that laptop CPUs were also affected. Now, this claim is coming from Alderaan Games, who recently had a huge post, which I covered in depth, talking about the massive problems they've been experiencing with 13th and 14th gen, especially the 13900K and 14900K CPUs, as well as others, in server issues, game development issues, their game user issues, all sorts of stuff. But you can watch a previous video talking about that, and in general, all of the 13th and 14th gen CPU stability issues. However, they made the claim that several laptops have failed with the same crashes, just being more rare, so less common than the desktop CPU faults. However, it looks like Intel has actually directly responded to the claim of this affecting laptops. So we get a direct quote from Intel, which is very interesting to me. Let's just read it. So this is a direct quote from Intel made to Digital Trends, who had reported on this laptop claim. Intel says Intel is aware of a small number of instability reports on Intel 13th, 14th gen mobile processors. Based on their in-depth analysis of the reported Intel Core 13th, 14th gen desktop processor instability issues, Intel has determined that mobile products are not exposed to the same issues. So Intel is claiming, at least, that their mobile products aren't exposed to the same issue. However, what I'm so curious about is how Intel instantly jumps in saying that they can absolutely, claim that the mobile processors are not exposed to the same issue. But what exactly is causing the issue? Okay, because that's where everybody's speculation is. The rest of their quote here is just saying it's just normal, software bugs and whatnot causing those laptop crashes. Because the thing is, a lot of people right now are, anytime they have a crash and you have an Intel-based system, especially on the 13th or 14th gen, a lot of people are understandably going to assume it's this big instability issue that we've been hearing, because I think a lot of that's exacerbated by the fact that Intel is not coming out and explicitly saying exactly what their in-depth analysis has indicated is the problem, exactly who is affected, how to tell, what they're going to do about it. And that brings me to the latest Gamers Nexus video on this topic, which has a lot of interesting information. Now, it's very important, and Gamers Nexus were very careful to make this statement, that they're talking about information that has been given to them that they have not been able to verify independently. Gamers Nexus has talked about sending off some CPUs to failure analysis labs to try to get independent verification of some of these claims, and that has not yet been completed. That could take a lot of time and a lot of money, although they are interested in moving forward with that, it sounds like. But anyway, it looks like Gamers Nexus is saying that they have a lead claiming that Intel has an issue with its fabrication process, where its anti-oxidation coating was improperly applied, leading to oxidized VIAs. Now, that is absolutely huge if true, because that could mean that, again, if this is an issue with the actual fabrication process, there could be massive numbers of CPUs affected and is not necessarily something that you can solve from a software update, right? So anyway, this could be a major issue with upcoming CPU reviews as well. That's something that Gamers Nexus touched on in their video, and I think this is really important to highlight because CPU reviewers, with the next generation of AMD processors coming out, I mean, we're seeing lots of headlines like this one as the benchmarks start to leak out, like, okay, Ryzen 9 9950X outperforms Core i9 14900 Chaos by 12% with unlimited power settings. Okay, but now imagine this in the context of an actual actual day one review for the new Ryzen 9000 series chips, because you want to compare them to the competition from Intel as well as previous generations from AMD. The problem is, at what settings do you test the Intel chips? Because Intel has been releasing a lot of, updated BIOSes that run at, reduced power settings, but they're also kind of cagey on, okay, but they're all within spec and okay to use. Which ones do you use to review? Because if you do your CPU testing for Intel CPUs, running, the original settings that most people were testing when they launched at much higher power targets than what might end up actually being stable, because there's a lot of talk about even if this is that kind of hardware issue with oxidation, that you can reduce some of the problems by running like lower memory frequencies and lower multipliers to like 53x and things like that. That has actual performance issues. So at what point, how do CPU reviewers deal with that? I mean, it sounded like Gamers Nexus's stance is going to be to just make it very clear in their review that they've tested Intel at their, settings that they were originally released at, unless Intel quickly gives other guidance, but that they just cannot recommend buying Intel CPUs at this point. Now, the problem with that, though, is that the actual benchmark numbers are still out there and then can get referred to later if Intel then later changes the spec. So I'm wondering if Intel is actually intentionally waiting to give concrete numbers on maybe how they're going to have to draw back performance to try to get more stability or anything like that until after the Ryzen 9000 series reviews come out, where they'll probably, at least at many review outlets, be running at the full power settings. They'll get those benchmark numbers out there, and then if Intel later, after the fact, then reduces performance, that won't have made it into those day one reviews. They're going to get bad publicity either way. But I don't know. It's like Intel comes out and instantly responds to this mobile processor claim saying, no, it's not the same issue. Okay, it's not the same issue, but you've done all this in-depth analysis. Give us all of the details, right? Unless Intel themselves aren't even sure what's going on, which would be a whole other disaster in and of itself. But anyway, I highly recommend watching the Gamers Nexus video if you want a whole bunch more information. Again, careful to say that a lot of it's not... the problem is all this stuff we're dealing with right now isn't like the official answer to any of this, because Intel seems to be avoiding giving an official answer to all of this. Now, anyway, with AMD's 9000 series processors coming out, I reported in 5 days or so ago, AMD gave out a whole bunch more information about what to expect from performance on a whole bunch of their new chips. However, they still hadn't released pricing, and they still haven't at this point. And that's kind of unusual. I feel like with the last generation of Zen 4 processors, we knew pricing by this point. So maybe AMD themselves are still playing around with pricing up till the last minute. We've certainly seen them do that with GPU launches and things like that. So I was trying to figure out what's the latest info on that. At WCCF Tech, they're reporting on some alleged pricing. So be clear, alleged pricing. Could be that the 9950X would come in at $499, 9900X at $399, 9700X at $299, and 9600X at $229. Now, this would be better pricing than what a lot of people had been speculating, and especially the 9600X would be way more attractive at $229 than it is at $299. I almost feel like this sounds too good to be true. Like, I think it maybe would be more like what AMD should do, but not necessarily what I would expect them to do. So I was digging into, okay, so where did WCCF Tech get this information from? And this feels a little bit shaky, so I'm not going to put huge credence in this. This is apparently an Anantech or Anantech, I don't know the right way to pronounce that, a forum user basically texting a friend who works at Best Buy. And the friend gave tentative pricing, but that could change when they update with confirmed retail sales date. So apparently this, if you believe the source, is tentative pricing given to Best Buy at this time, but acknowledging that it could change, and that's if we trust that source at all to begin with. But anyway, I'd really like to know what the pricing is going to be at. Now, other information related to the 9000 series could be better overclocking support on memory and changes to how all of that works. And it looks like going along with that, we're seeing G.Skill introducing Trident Z5 Royal memory going up to DDR5-8000 memory on an AMD EXPO profile, which to my knowledge is fastest like EXPO profile available, because there's a difference between what you can try to like manually overclock versus what's just in an EXPO profile where hopefully you just click a button in the BIOS and you're good to go at those speeds. Again, hopefully it actually ends up being stable at those speeds and all of that. But anyway, interesting stuff for sure looking at the next 9000 series of desktop chips, but AMD also has their upcoming new mobile processor lineup, and we're starting to see benchmark leaks leaking out for those as well. For example, we're seeing WCCF Tech showing that AMD Ryzen AI 9, man, the naming scheme on this thing. The AMD Ryzen AI 9 HX370, there we go, which is the 12-core APU, is apparently faster than the 20-core 14700HX and 14-core M3 Max in passmark benchmark. So basically it looks like, as people get their hands on review samples, a lot of online review databases kind of automatically upload that data, and that's where you get a lot of the prior to actual review embargo benchmark leaks coming from. So we see passmark CPU mark here showing laptop and portable CPU performance, and you can see where the Ryzen AI 9 HX370 falls in the stack. So there's that, but again, these aren't full reviews at this point, so I don't want to dwell too much on that. Now shifting over from AMD CPUs to AMD GPUs, we're now seeing AMD Radeon RX 6000, 7000 GPUs are now supporting Twitch's enhanced broadcasting. A week or two ago, I reported that Nvidia GPUs had support for Twitch enhanced broadcasting, and now it's looking like AMD 6000, 7000 series are having support as well. If you're wondering, okay, what the heck is enhanced broadcasting? So the idea here is to allow streaming at multiple resolutions and frame rates. So a multi-track transcode, I guess is what we would call that, simultaneously from the Twitch streamer themselves. Because when you're streaming to Twitch, normally I think you would encode at one particular, setting, like maybe you're doing 720p 60 FPS or something like that. And then I think the bigger Twitch streams would have support for, maybe you had 1080p 60, 720p 60, 720p 30, 480p, all sorts of different things. But that would be being handled by Twitch themselves doing that transcode. But the smaller streamers wouldn't get support for that because it costs Twitch money to support all of that, right? So the idea here is that if you're one of the streamers who didn't have access to all of that transcoding from Twitch themselves, you can now do that yourself from your GPU. And enable multiple streams. Now, I couldn't find information in this article on how many transcoded streams the AMD GPUs are supporting at this time, although Nvidia had made claims on the number they were doing, and it was different based on which GPU you had. But anyway, this sounds like good news for people streaming to Twitch, and it's good to see AMD getting support quickly for that feature as well. In other really big AMD GPU support news, we're seeing headlines that Nvidia's CUDA can now directly run on AMD GPUs using the Scale toolkit. So while CUDA and just in general more the professional side of things as opposed to gaming side of GPUs is not really my specialty, this does look really interesting when I read into it, because certainly that's a place where AMD can really fall behind in support, because AMD has lower market share. A lot of professional applications are programmed around the market share leader, which is Nvidia, and with their proprietary CUDA. So being able to have developers, I think the way this is basically designed to work is developers can basically just do what they're doing with CUDA, and then Scale can then make a version of that should just run directly on AMD GPUs. Seems to be the idea. So the idea is we believe that it should be possible to write code once and run it on any hardware platform. This has been a reality for CPU code for many years, so why not GPUs? So that's the idea behind Scale. Spectral Compute CEO who is behind this whole Scale thing. Now, Scale isn't open source. It is closed source, but it does appear to have at least a free version or something like that. They're claiming it works by Scale accepts CUDA program as is. No need to port them to any other language. This is true even if your program uses inline PTX ASM. The Scale compiler accepts the same command line options and CUDA dialect as NVCC, serving as a drop-in replacement. It impersonates an installation of the Nvidia CUDA toolkit, so existing build tools and scripts like CMake just work. I mean, if this really works that simply, this sounds absolutely huge in terms of probably getting a whole bunch more better support for AMD hardware on a lot of applications that are designed with CUDA in mind, which is really cool. It's unclear to me if Nvidia could just do something with CUDA that just breaks this intentionally. I don't know. So again, not my absolute specialty. I focus more on the gaming side of things, but this looks interesting. And if this is more your wheelhouse, let us know in the comment sections if this is as big of a deal as it certainly seems like it could be. Now, speaking of AMD GPUs, their upcoming mobile lineup will have improved APUs, including an 890M, which would be 16 compute units, which AMD did some performance claims talking about at 15 watts, some major improvements. But that was comparing, as far as I understood it, their 16 compute unit generation versus the previous generation's 12 compute unit version. But we're getting some interesting information about comparing the 880M to the 780M, which are both 12 compute units, but the 880M moving to RDNA 3.5. Now, I've been really into playing on my Steam Deck lately, so I'm really interested right now in the performance and progression of these handheld gaming PC type graphics. So I'm really interested in what happens with this. The claim here is that the RDNA 3.5 version will be 15% faster than the 780M. Now, this is coming from, I'm getting this in a videocards.com article, but it looks like the source is ASUS, where they talk about one of their upcoming laptops here. They say AMD's new generation Radeon 880M graphics card, graphics performance close to 40-watt RTX 3050. The new AMD RDNA 3.5 architecture upgrade with 12 compute unit graphics cores, so again, we're talking the 12 compute unit version, boost core graphics performance by approximately 15% compared to the previous generation, again, approaching the performance of the 40-watt RTX 3050. So that's pretty interesting. They're giving these performance numbers here with the 780M as the baseline, 15% faster on the 880M, and that's kind of falling in between, although not quite halfway in between the 780M and the RTX 3050 at 40 watts. So that's pretty cool. Again, I'm really interested in what happens with that PC space. Now, what are they doing with this RDNA 3.5 architecture anyway? It's not a complete rework. We're not talking RDNA 4. And I found this interesting article, which might have a bit of a white background, so flashbang warning, at PC Gamer, talking about AMD's tweaked RDNA 3.5 GPU and how it's focused specifically on mobile gaming performance. So how can they boost performance at low wattages in the form factor where you're dealing with, shared system RAM rather than having your own dedicated VRAM, and the kind of tweaks that they made. And there's a whole bunch of little changes that I think are helping with that. But also, I thought this quote was really interesting, just as kind of a behind-the-scenes thing, which was Mark Papermaster, AMD's chief technology officer, began by pointing out that the changes culminated from its collaboration with Samsung, which licenses AMD's graphics tech for the Exynos range of smartphone and tablet processors. So it looks like some of the inspiration for what they tweaked with the RDNA 3.5 versus 3 was actually based on work Samsung was doing with their Exynos processors that use AMD technology. So I just think that's pretty interesting. Now, I'm not going to get into all of the changes that they made. You can read, again, all my sources will be in the video description, so definitely Feel free to follow up with what all of those changes are. It doesn't seem like anything absolutely massive, but is certainly interesting. Now, in other AMD GPU news, but this is kind of in the leaks rumor side of things, Acer's EEC filing did list an RX 7900, 7800, and 7700 non-XT model, non-XT models for those cards. However, EEC filings don't necessarily mean that something's actually going to happen. It can sometimes, I think, just be a preemptive, hey, let's just file this in case it ever comes out. So I wouldn't put much stock in this. I think it'd be kind of weird if we got too much of a 7000 series update at this point in time, given how close we should be theoretically to the full next generation. Latest rumors on when will we get a 8000 series of AMD GPUs point towards the announcement at least being at CES in 2025, although again, that's in the leaks and rumors side of things, so make of it what you will. Now, moving on to some Nvidia news. This sounds interesting, but when I read more details about it, maybe doesn't seem like as big of a deal as the headline seems to make. So Nvidia post at their developer blog that Nvidia is transitioning fully towards open source GPU kernel modules. Now, this is in the context of their Linux GPUs, Linux drivers for their GPUs, because Nvidia has been, I think, famously less well supported on their drivers and things on Linux compared to AMD, and I think even Intel has better support. But I'm not a Linux expert on all of this. However, I originally found this through an R Hardware post on the R Hardware subreddit, and there was a really good top comment here, which I'll link in the video description, where I would say, again, I'm just going to kind of take their word for it because they seem way more knowledgeable about the Linux side of all of this than I am, that points out that this is maybe not that big of a deal because it's looking like a lot of their driver logic is on the card itself rather than in the driver. So the driver going open source, a lot of the actual like user space is still in their firmware, which is closed source. And can't be replaced due to on-card cryptographic signature checks. And it also talks about how NVIDIA's Linux drivers, the way NVIDIA does these, doesn't follow Linux's guidelines for its design, which means it won't be in tree, which means it wouldn't be part of Linux's source code and development process. And it sounds like none of this new headline changes any of that. There's a whole bunch more really interesting information about this. I found this to be a really fun read. And also talks about some comparisons with how like AMD works on Linux and all of that. So it seems to be the case that while some moves are being made here, that maybe NVIDIA is still not moving to the same level of Linux driver support and just being built into the Linux kernel and development process the way AMD is. Now, Hardware Unboxed today put out a video that I was looking at in the background while I was actually putting today's news sources. And I found this really interesting because I've been talking about VRAM usage a lot lately. I've been looking at their 4060 Ti 8GB versus 16GB and looking at when there's performance issues, which Hardware Unboxed was doing in this video, but also going a little bit further and talking about the fact that, not that they mentioned me in particular, but I'm saying when people like me benchmark graphics cards, we're often on a high-end system, which would have, PCIe 4.0. However, what about users using these graphics cards on older systems that might only have PCIe 3.0? I think 2.0 by this point in time would be a bit of a stretch, but who knows? But what they were looking at in this video was how much worse it is when you spill over VRAM capacity when you're on a slower version of PCIe. Because what they're showing here is that on the 4.0 version, they show that there's certainly issues in the 1% lows and spikes on the frame time graphs, as I see in my videos when I've shown this, and they show versus the 16GB card, which runs smoothly. But then if you run the same thing on the 8GB card on PCIe 3.0, or 2.0, you see that the frame time graphs get massively worse, and the 1% lows are even more abysmal, getting down into the single digits on PCIe 2.0. Anyway, there's a ton of games tested, and he also looks into things like missing textures and all of that. So if you've been interested in the VRAM-related content, I highly recommend checking out this video from Hardware Unboxed. And again, all my sources will be linked in the video description. But I thought this was a very interesting point, that when you're on, so people on older systems with PCIe 3.0 are going to be having an even worse time on those 8GB cards when they spill over. And I mean, this would apply to any card that's spilling over VRAM, not just the 8GB card. So even if you're on a 4GB or 6GB card or whatever, when you're spilling over VRAM, if you're on a slower version of PCIe, it looks like it's going to hit you even worse than what we see in a lot of the testing that I've done. So interesting. Now, moving on to Intel GPU news, the latest thing I could find is just that XeSS SDK has been updated to version 1.3.1 on GitHub, but it doesn't seem to have any major changes. It just says bug fixes and stability improvements. So cool, but doesn't seem like that's going to be some kind of major revolution in XeSS. Now, Microsoft is getting a lot of pushback against their Game Pass price hikes, including being pushed back by the FTC. So we know that the FTC had, the whole big thing over Microsoft and their acquisitions and accusations of, monopoly and whatnot. So with Microsoft then raising Game Pass prices, the FTC is questioning them on that. Now, Microsoft is defending it by talking about how, well, but we're bundling in the online gaming part in there too, and, price hikes are part of subscription services are just a normal part of business, but whatever. Anyway, I'm just really interested where Microsoft is going with their whole Xbox brand and all of that. At least the price hikes on PC seem to be a lot more limited. So at least on the PC side of things, it seemed to be much less bad than what they're seeing in the console side. But anyway, speaking of Game Pass, in general, there's all sorts of issues with Game Pass PC versions. Can Microsoft, if they really are going to end up transitioning more towards a PC side of things or wanting to take that area more seriously, they really need to get their Xbox launcher and just so their PC launcher, is it called an Xbox launcher on PC? I don't even know, but their Windows game launcher needs to work better. It needs to work more consistently. Sometimes it just won't install games for me, and sometimes the version of the game that you get on Game Pass is worse than the version of the game you get from Steam or even Epic or anything like that, where oftentimes I've noticed that the Game Pass version of games lack things like DLSS, FSR at launch. We saw this fairly recently, this is just a recent example. This has happened in multiple games over the years, where Still Wakes the Deep didn't have DLSS and FSR in their Game Pass PC version, although it was available in the Steam version of the game. The game developers mentioned that it's due to technical limitations due to the difference between how the Game Pass and Steam Epic Store versions are built. And unfortunately, this means that other upscaling options aren't available in the Game Pass version. At least that was at launch. Now, they have added it in now on July 17th, so it took about a month for that to happen. But the point is just there's so many reasons why Microsoft's platform on PC is just not as good as it should be. So if they're going to be doing these price hikes, especially if they want to move to PC as a bigger focus, they really need to just improve the basic way their whole app and launcher works. But anyway, that's enough of a rant on that. Again, hopefully you survived Blue Screen Day yesterday and aren't still dealing with the aftermath of all of that, as I'm sure many IT people may be. Now, personally, I am going to be moving, not to like a different town or anything, but to a different house in town. It'll actually cut down on my commute since I'm still teaching full-time. One of the ways I can maximize the efficient use of my time would be basically living as close as possible to my school, as well as some other improvements to the place. But that means that this week I will be very busy. Now, I have done a lot of work to get some videos ready ahead of time. So I have some videos that are currently available to channel members in early access, and I might be able to get a few more out before I actually do the move. So the point is, I'm hoping to still be able to post videos throughout the week during the move, both stuff that I've recorded ahead of time, as well as hoping to transition to the new house quickly and be able to get up and running again fast. But hopefully I can still post a video at least every other day, but we'll see what happens. And again, channel members will see any content I get ready ahead of time early. There's already some of that out there. So huge thank you to channel members who've clicked that join button to directly support the channel financially. That is absolutely huge. Totally understand not everybody's in a position to do that. That is absolutely fine. But huge thank you to everybody, viewers, subscribers, commenters, all of that. You're all beautiful people, and I hope everyone has an excellent day.